When I told Caleb he wasn't the man I fell in love with, I didn't expect him to drop the mug he was holding, the coffee splashing out like blood on the white tiles, and just walk out without a word.
No slam doors. No cursing.
Not even a sideways glance at me. Just the quiet scrape of his boots against the floor, the sound of the front door clicking shut behind him, and then the silence that rang louder than any screaming match ever could. I stood there for a long time, hand still in the air like I was holding on to the last word, feeling the way the entire weight of what I had just said started to settle into my chest like wet cement. I didn't chase him. I didn't even move. I just let it happen because part of me was too proud, and part of me was too scared to admit I didn't even mean it. Not really. We weren't supposed to be that couple, you know? The kind that falls apart over invisible cracks that nobody notices until the floor caves in. Caleb and I met in the stupidest way. I hit his truck trying to parallel park outside a hardware store. He came out holding a bag of nails and a Gatorade, looked at the dent, and laughed like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened to him. I hated him for being so damn relaxed about it, while I was a sweaty, swearing mess. But that laugh, God, that laugh hooked itself into my ribs before I even realized what was happening. He fixed my bumper 2 days later, and I bought him a six-pack to say thank you. We talked until midnight sitting on the tailgate of his truck, and it didn't take long after that before we were sharing a bed, a lease, and eventually, a wedding ring. But years grind down the shiny parts of a relationship until all you're left with are the dull edges you either learn to live with or keep stabbing each other on. Caleb was steady, stubborn as hell, a man who found comfort in the predictable. Same boots, same flannel shirts, same little diner every Sunday morning where he ordered the same coffee with too much sugar. I loved him for it once. I used to tell myself how lucky I was to have someone who didn't make me guess where I stood. But somewhere along the line, I started craving something else, something electric, unpredictable, wild. It wasn't about wanting someone new. It was about wanting the feeling he used to give me, that rush, that fire, and somewhere deep inside, I started blaming him for the fact that real life had gotten boring. It didn't happen overnight. It was small things at first, the way he would come home with sawdust still clinging to his jeans, smelling like wood and sweat, and I'd wrinkle my nose instead of pulling him close. The way he'd tell me some story about a cabinet he built or a client he met, and I would nod and smile, but my mind would already be somewhere else, scrolling Instagram, wondering how the hell all these other couples still looked so alive. It got worse after I got promoted at the design firm. Suddenly, I was surrounded by sleek suits and power lunches, people who talked fast and dreamed big, and Caleb's slow drawl and quiet nights started to feel like an anchor around my neck instead of a safe harbor. "You don't even listen anymore," he said once, sitting across from me at the dinner table, pushing his mashed potatoes around his plate like a bored kid. "I hear you just fine." I shot back, scrolling through my emails, barely glancing up. "There's a difference between hearing and listening, Naomi," he said, and there was no anger in his voice, just a sadness so thick it made my throat close up. But I didn't put my phone down. I didn't reach across the table. I didn't do a damn thing. The real breaking point came the night of my boss's cocktail party. I had begged Caleb to come, desperate for him to fit into that shiny new world I was clawing my way into, but he stood in the kitchen in his old jeans and said, "I don't belong there, Naomi. You know it and I know it." I hated him for it, hated how he made it sound like I was the one changing, like wanting more was some kind of betrayal. So, I went alone. I drank too much champagne and laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and when I stumbled home, heels in hand, Caleb was sitting on the porch swing, waiting. "You look happy," he said, voice so flat it didn't even sound like him. And that's when I said it, standing there with my hair a mess, my mascara smudged, feeling braver and meaner than I ever should have felt toward the only man who had ever stayed when things got hard. "You're not the man I fell in love with," I said, slurring just a little, not enough to blame it on the alcohol, just enough to make it easier to pretend I didn't mean it later. "You're just a ghost of him." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't even look hurt. He just let the coffee mug fall from his hand, watched it shatter, and walked out into the night like I was a house already burning down. I didn't hear from Caleb for 2 days. Not a text, not a call, not even a petty comment on social media that I could twist into a lifeline. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I just went to work, smiled through meetings, nodded at my boss's dry jokes, and then went home to an apartment that suddenly felt too big for one person. His boots were still by the door. His jacket still hung on the coat rack. For some stupid reason, I kept thinking that if I didn't touch any of his things, it meant he would come back and step into them like nothing had changed. I didn't even let myself sit on the couch because that's where he used to nap on Sunday afternoons, head tilted back, mouth slightly open, breathing so deep you'd think he had no worries in the world. But he was gone, and the silence in the apartment wasn't peaceful. It was accusing. The third day, I cracked and called him. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't make it worse. I told myself he was just trying to cool off, but deep down, I knew it was different this time. I knew it wasn't a fight we were going to circle back to and pretend never happened. That night, I met up with my friend Zoe, who always knew when something was wrong even if I showed up with my hair done and my best fake smile in place. "You look like shit," she said bluntly as soon as I sat down across from her at the bar. "Gee, thanks," I muttered, ordering a drink I wasn't even sure I wanted. "You want to tell me why you keep checking your phone every 3 minutes?" Zoe asked, raising an eyebrow. I sipped my drink slowly, feeling the burn at the back of my throat, and then I told her, not all the messy details, just enough that her expression turned from playful to something a lot heavier. "You told him he wasn't the man you fell in love with," she repeated, not even trying to soften it. "I didn't mean it," I said quickly. "I was just mad and he was acting like—" I trailed off, realizing how childish it sounded even to my own ears. "Naomi, you don't say shit like that unless a part of you means it," she said, leaning forward on her elbows. "Even if it's a small, ugly part you usually pretend isn't there." I didn't answer her. I didn't want to admit how long I had been carrying that thought around in the dark corners of my mind, where it was easy to pretend it didn't count because I never said it out loud. Zoe didn't push. She just finished her drink and signaled the bartender for the check. "Look," she said, pulling her jacket on, "you can either find him and fix it or you can sit here and keep pretending you're the victim." I didn't like the way she said it, like I was a spoiled kid throwing a tantrum because the world didn't shape itself around my moods. But she wasn't wrong. That night, when I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my phone for an hour before I finally texted him. No big dramatic apology. Just a simple, "Caleb, can we talk?" It showed as delivered, but never read. The next morning, my boss asked me if I wanted to go on a weekend business trip. Just a quick 2 days out of town to meet with a new client. Normally, I would have jumped at the chance, but the thought of leaving the city while things were like this made my stomach twist. I told him I had personal things to handle. I lied and said it was a family emergency because it sounded better than admitting my marriage was crumbling and I couldn't focus on anything else. That afternoon, I finally broke down and called Caleb's best friend, Mason. I hadn't talked to Mason much outside of group settings because he always gave me the impression he didn't think I was good enough for Caleb. But I didn't have anyone else to ask. "Hey, Naomi," Mason answered, sounding cautious. "Have you heard from Caleb?" I asked without even pretending to make small talk. There was a pause, just long enough to make my palms sweat. "Yeah," he said eventually. "He's staying at my place for now." Relief and dread hit me at the same time. "Is he okay?" I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "He's fine," Mason said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear he didn't think I deserved more than that. "Can I see him?" "Please, Mason, just tell him I want to talk," I said quickly, afraid he was about to hang up on me. Another pause. Then Mason sighed. "I'll tell him you called. That's all I can promise." The line went dead, and I sat there staring at the black screen like it might somehow bring him back if I just looked hard enough. Hours later, when no reply came, I started pacing the apartment. Every creak of the floorboards, every car door slamming outside made me freeze, hoping it was him. By midnight, I was sitting on the floor against the front door, head in my hands, wondering how the hell things had gotten so bad without me even noticing. I had spent so long thinking I was the one being left behind that I never realized I was the one walking away first, Little by little, with every complaint, every sigh, every time I made him feel like his best wasn't enough. And now, maybe for the first time, Caleb had decided not to chase after me. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept staring at the front door like somehow I could will it to open. By the time the sun started leaking through the blinds, I felt like I had been awake for days. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't want, scrolling through my phone, rereading our old texts like they were clues to a mystery I had already solved too late. Around 8, I got a text from Mason. It was short. Caleb doesn't want to talk. I read it twice just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. I set the phone down carefully, trying to keep my breathing steady, but it was useless.
He wasn't just giving me space to calm down. He was making a decision.
Around noon, I drove to Mason's place anyway. I didn't tell him I was coming because I knew he would have told me not to. When I pulled up to the curb and saw Caleb's old truck parked outside, I almost lost my nerve. I sat there for a few minutes, fingers clenched so tight around the steering wheel they hurt. Then I got out and walked up to the door. I didn't knock right away. I stood there with my fist raised, listening to the muffled sound of a television inside, a laugh track from some sitcom that made everything feel even more pathetic. Finally, I knocked. Mason opened the door, looking tired and annoyed.
He didn't invite me in.
He didn't even move aside to let me see past him. Is he here? I asked, even though I already knew. He doesn't want to see you, Naomi, Mason said, crossing his arms over his chest. I just need 5 minutes, I said, my voice catching. Mason hesitated, then shook his head. He said if you showed up, to tell you it's done. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay standing there. Please, I said, hating how desperate I sounded. Mason looked over his shoulder like he was checking if Caleb was within earshot, then turned back to me. You don't get it, do you? You broke something you can't just glue back together with an apology. You made him feel like he wasn't enough, and that man already spent his whole damn life thinking he wasn't enough for anyone.
I didn't know what to say to that.
I didn't even know how much Caleb had carried before he met me, because he had never made it my burden. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I knew it would only make me look worse. If he changes his mind, tell him I'm sorry, I said finally, the words burning my throat. Mason just nodded once and closed the door in my face. I stood there for a minute, not knowing what to do, feeling more alone than I had ever felt before. Finally, I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there staring at the steering wheel until the cold from the leather seeped into my skin. I didn't hear from Caleb for the rest of the week. Every day felt longer than the last. At work, I went through the motions, pretending to care about client calls and project deadlines, but my head wasn't there. Every night, I sat on the couch staring at the front door like an idiot, half expecting him to walk back in and tell me he was willing to try, that he didn't want to throw everything away. But he didn't. By the end of the week, a letter showed up at the apartment. No return address. I recognized Caleb's handwriting right away, neat and a little tilted to the right. I opened it with shaking hands. There were only a few lines written on the page.
Naomi,
I loved you. I really did. But I can't spend the rest of my life wondering when you'll stop loving me again. I need more than someone who thinks I'm standing still just because I don't run after shiny things. I hope you find what you're looking for. Caleb. I read it 5 times, trying to find something between the lines that wasn't there. Some hint that he was still waiting for me to fight for him. But the words were final. Caleb wasn't angry. He wasn't asking for a grand apology or begging for one last chance. He was done. I folded the letter carefully, like it might tear if I moved too fast, and set it down on the table. I thought about calling him anyway, thought about driving back to Mason's, but deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. Caleb had finally put himself first. He had finally decided that loving me wasn't enough to stay anymore. That night, Zoe called to check on me. I didn't want to answer, but I knew she would just keep calling if I didn't. How bad is it? She asked as soon as I picked up. Worse than you think, I said, staring at the letter on the table. You want me to come over? She offered. No, I said. I need to sit with this one. There was a long pause. Then Zoe said, Not everyone gets a second chance after they tear something apart. Sometimes you don't even get the chance to say sorry the way you want to. I know, I said, my throat tightening. Then don't waste time feeling sorry for yourself, she said. Learn from it. We hung up without saying goodbye, and for once, I didn't feel mad at her for being so blunt. I sat there for a long time, thinking about everything I had taken for granted, every time Caleb had made space for me without ever asking for anything in return, every time I had mistaken stability for weakness. I thought about how easy it had been to hurt him with a few careless words, and how impossible it was to undo the damage once it was done. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't deserve to be the one who decided if we were worth saving. A week later, the first sign that Caleb wasn't going to just disappear quietly showed up on my doorstep. It wasn't him standing there like a stupid part of me hoped. It was a manila envelope, thick and heavy, my name scrawled across it in his handwriting. I didn't even take it inside before tearing it open right there in the hallway. Inside was a notice from a lawyer. Caleb had filed for divorce. No discussions, no warnings, no mediation offer. Just a clean, clear statement that he was done. Attached was a list of everything he was claiming. The truck was his, obviously, but he wanted the apartment too. I stood there for a second feeling like I'd been punched. The apartment was mine before we got married. My parents had helped with the down payment. It was supposed to be off limits. Caleb knew that. He knew it better than anyone. I called him immediately, hands shaking, heart racing. He didn't pick up, but this time I left a message, my voice cold and sharp. You want to take the apartment? Seriously, Caleb? After everything? I didn't even bother saying more. I knew he would listen to it even if he didn't respond. I spent the rest of the night pacing the apartment, thinking about every conversation we ever had about fairness, about how we promised that if it ever came to this, we'd be civil. I thought about the way he used to kiss me on the forehead when we were fighting just to remind me he loved me. I thought about how he never once threw anything in my face, no matter how many times I snapped at him. And now he was taking the one thing that had been mine before him. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel like him.
But the papers didn't lie.
2 days later, I ran into Mason at a coffee shop near my office. I didn't see him until it was too late to avoid him. He was standing in line, and I could tell by the way he stiffened that he had seen me too. I thought about just walking out, pretending I didn't have time for coffee after all, but pride kept me rooted to the spot. Mason didn't say anything when he saw me. He just gave me a nod that was more out of obligation than kindness. When we ended up waiting for our drinks together, I finally spoke. Why is he doing this? I asked, keeping my voice low. Mason didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the barista, wiping down the counter. You hurt him worse than you think, he said eventually. I get that, I said. But taking the apartment? That's not Caleb. Mason turned then, looking at me properly for the first time. Maybe it is now, he said. Maybe he's finally tired of always being the one who gives in. I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped myself. Mason grabbed his coffee when it was ready and left without saying anything else. That night, I went through the paperwork again, looking for some loophole, something that would give me a chance to fight back. My lawyer told me the prenup was weak and Caleb had a real shot at winning if he pushed hard enough. I felt like I was drowning in paperwork, drowning in consequences. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Caleb walking through a new door somewhere without me, smiling at a life where he didn't have to feel like he wasn't enough. The next morning, I woke up to another blow. Caleb had emptied our joint savings account. It wasn't a ton of money, but it was supposed to be split down the middle. Instead, the account balance showed exactly $47 and some change. I stared at the number on my screen for a long time, trying to feel something besides rage, but it crept up anyway, burning hot in my chest. I called him again, not caring if he picked up. This time he did. You emptied the account, I said, skipping any pretense of civility. I did, Caleb said, his voice calm. You know half of that was mine, I said, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. Maybe you should have thought about that before telling me I wasn't enough, he said. There was no yelling, no name-calling, just facts laid out like cold stones between us. This is petty, I said. This is fair,
Caleb said. You made it clear what you thought about me. I'm just giving you the freedom you wanted.
You're punishing me? I snapped. No, Naomi, he said quietly. I'm letting you live with what you chose. He hung up without waiting for a reply. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear long after the line went dead. I wanted to throw it across the room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to believe I was the victim. But I wasn't. Caleb wasn't trying to hurt me because he loved the idea of revenge. He was doing it because, for once, he wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces I smashed on the floor. By the end of the week, I had a court date for the divorce hearing and a notice to vacate the apartment. Caleb was taking it. I could fight it, but my lawyer warned me it would cost more than I could afford right now, especially with the savings account drained. I stared at the empty walls of the apartment that used to feel so alive, remembering how we painted them together, how we argued over which ugly couch to buy, how he carried me across the threshold like an idiot even though I told him not to, because it was stupid and cliché.
No metaphors. No romance.
Just facts. I was losing everything because I didn't know when to shut my mouth. Moving out of the apartment took 2 days longer than it should have. I couldn't bring myself to pack at first. I would pick up a mug, a picture frame, a set of keys we never used, and just sit there with it in my hands until my mind went blank. The movers came on a Tuesday afternoon. They didn't say much, just did their job while I tried to pretend I was somewhere else. I didn't have enough furniture to fill the tiny one-bedroom I found across town, but it didn't matter. I wasn't planning to stay long. It was a place to sleep and nothing more. The first night, I lay on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by boxes I didn't have the energy to unpack, and stared at the cracks in the ceiling until the sun came up. I didn't hear from Caleb again after the court date. He didn't look at me when we sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. He just answered the judge's questions, signed the papers, and walked out like I was a stranger he barely recognized. I stood outside the courthouse for a long time afterward, not knowing where to go. I could feel people passing by, could hear snippets of conversation about lunch plans and weekend trips, but none of it felt real. I thought about calling Zoe, thought about pretending I wanted to grab a drink like old times, but I knew it would sound forced. Instead, I got into my car and drove nowhere for hours, burning gas and time like either of them could make the hollow feeling in my chest go away. A week after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Caleb's sister, Anna, at the grocery store. I didn't see her until she was standing next to me in the produce aisle, tossing apples into a bag, like she didn't have a care in the world. When she noticed me, her smile faded fast. She didn't look angry, just tired. I wasn't sure what to say, if I should pretend not to see her, or if I should say something to acknowledge how badly I had hurt her brother. In the end, she made the decision for me. "You look like hell," Anna said, adjusting her sunglasses on top of her head. "Thanks," I muttered, not really sure if it was supposed to be an insult or an observation. "You know," she said, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, "I used to think you were the best thing that ever happened to him."
I didn't say anything.
What could I say that wouldn't make it worse? "He loved you," Anna continued, her voice even. "Not the way people say it when they're being dramatic. Caleb doesn't do dramatic. He loved you like you were part of him." "I know," I said quietly. "Then why'd you do it?" she asked, and for the first time, there was real anger in her voice, low and sharp. I opened my mouth to answer, but realized I didn't have anything that would sound good enough. Anything I said would sound like an excuse, and Anna didn't look like she had the patience to hear it. So I just shook my head. "Yeah," she said, grabbing her bag of apples and turning away. "That's what I thought." I stood there for a long time after she left, feeling like every person who brushed past me could see exactly what I had done written across my forehead. Days blurred together after that. I went to work, smiled when I needed to, answered emails, sat through meetings, all the things that made it easy to pretend my life wasn't falling apart behind the scenes. People asked about Caleb sometimes, mostly coworkers who didn't know better, and every time I had to lie and say things like, "It just didn't work out," or "We grew apart," while fighting the urge to scream that no, I destroyed it because I didn't know how to appreciate what I had until it was gone. Sometimes late at night, when the city outside got quiet enough, I would catch myself scrolling through old pictures on my phone. There was one from a camping trip we took 2 years ago, Caleb squinting into the camera with the sun in his eyes, holding a fish he was way too proud of. I stared at that photo longer than I should have, remembering how he had woken up at dawn just to catch it because he knew it would make me laugh. I remembered the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, like I was the best part of his whole world. I remembered every single thing I never said back when it would have mattered. A month after the divorce, I heard from a mutual friend that Caleb had moved out of town. Just packed up his truck and took a job 2 states away. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know if he was seeing someone new or if he had already found a life where he didn't feel like second best. It was easier to picture him happy, building something real, something better than what I ever gave him. Sometimes people ask if I would do things differently if I had the chance. If I would take back what I said that night. The truth is, I don't even need a second chance to know the answer. I would have kept my mouth shut. I would have grabbed his hand when he stood there staring at me, with his heart breaking in his eyes. I would have told him he was enough, that he had always been enough. But life doesn't wait for you to figure things out. It just moves on without you. And Caleb did too.